very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So firstly, thank you for having us. We are very happy to be here and to present to you a little bit more on what the Circular Economy Committee has been working on. So just as a general overview, for those who are not familiar with ISO, ISO is an international organization, independent, non-governmental organization, that is. We work primarily with our members, which are the national standardization bodies in each country. We only work with one organization per country, whatever is recognized as the peak body in that country. These members then nominate experts, which then populate our committees that work on the content of these documents. We also work with external organizations that might, like UNEP, for instance, that might come into the committee as an external organization through that path as well. Next slide, please. Just to give you a snapshot of the TC 323 committee, these countries highlighted in dark gray and middle gray, I'd say, are all the countries involved in the work that has been done by TC 323, which is the Circular Economy Committee. At the moment, it's 100 countries involved in the work. The ones that are very light gray are the countries that are currently not involved. I have to say that it's constantly changing. So sometimes countries come on board, sometimes countries for resource reasons might leave, but it's always around about 100 at the moment. So just to give you an idea how many countries have been involved in the work of this committee. Next slide, please. So the committee has been working on a suite of standards, which is really important to know. The ones on the top, this suite of standards highlighted as coming soon, will be published in May. So the committee has worked for a while on these documents, and I will talk about that a little bit more in a second. So the first suite of standards that will be released is around vocabulary, the principles and guidance for the implementation, guidance on the transition of business models and value networks, and measuring and assessing circularity performances. The committee is still working on two other standards at the moment, the product circularity data sheet, and also quite important, the 59014, sustainability and traceability of secondary materials recovery, the principles and requirements. Furthermore, they're working on two technical reports for performance-based approaches and a review of business model implementations. Next slide, please. So the committee, as mentioned by the lovely lady before me, definitions or common language is sometimes an issue. So the committee has worked for 4 years on this definition. They have been trying to apply a holistic point of view. Obviously, economy is embedded in societal environmental systems, and when the environment is suffering, so society and economy will suffer as well. This definition promotes generally a circular flow of resources, like recovering, retaining, and adding to their value. Obviously, we do not forget the social part of it with contributing to sustainable development. The notes are also important in this definition. As stated in note 2, it is important to minimize waste, loss, and release. We try to begin to understand that design for circularity will be the key, that design to tackle waste and pollution is also the key. Obviously, this is not just a definition. The definition comes with 6 principles, which we cannot, they are all linked. The definitions are linked and the principles are linked. Additionally to the principles, the committee also worked on actions, which I will talk to in the next slide, please. So those are the 6 principles that complete the definition. The main points to focus on are to change, obviously, our mindset, to adopt a long-term approach that is not done currently, specifically in private companies. Unless we come, when a climate roadmap exists in some countries, then private companies are more likely to take on that approach. We also want to better consider value chain and value networks to be able to share and create value. In this, collaboration is obviously crucial. We also want to slow, narrow, and close loops as far as possible for materials due to resource depletion. To be transparent, accountable about information, we want to promote better reuse, repair, remanufacturing, as needed. We need good data management as well along the system for the value chain and within the value networks, which ISO 59040 is dealing with. The most important is to keep our development within the planetary boundaries, which is currently obviously not the case, as we saw in the slides before, presented by UNEP, and producing and doing things without losses and emissions. Next slide, please. These are the actions on the left-hand side of the screen that have to be considered by an organization to implement circular economy. The organization needs to review its processes to source with less footprint, to procure, including specific criteria in the product repairable, like is the product repairable, is it recyclable? In its own processes, the organization has to kind of develop some form of another business model, like secondhand instead of new products or renting out, to apply these CE principles. The table provides resource management guidance. It is intended to help organizations prioritize actions to increase circularity. Life cycle perspective should guide the organization in the identification of the best action for their value creation model and to avoid unwanted trade-offs. The transition towards a circular economy is currently in different stages, obviously in different countries. The activities of organizations are influenced by the system that have been developed for linear production and consumption systems. To improve the conditions, participation of relevant actors should occur to enable systems change towards a circular economy. This also means that subsystems such as education, research, political, legal, economical systems also need to be reformed, as well as support should be provided for the evaluation and evolution of cultural values and norms. Depending on the types of organizations, these actions could be considered as enablers. So next slide, please. So the strategy, just to give you a little bit of background and history of the committee as well. The committee worked from 2019 to 2023 to come to an agreement on this packet on standards. They developed the 3 standards at the same time for a common understanding of what circular economy actually is. They also wanted to work on actions to implement and indicators to measure the performance at the same time. Over the 5 years they have been working together, they have aligned these three standards with alignment sessions and making sure that the consensus is there on all levels. Also, it was very important from the get-go to involve all geographical regions, especially developing countries as well. We have a system in place at ISO, which is called twinning, where we support developing countries to take on leadership roles in committees. And that was very important to the committee from the beginning, not only to involve them in the development of the content, but also taking on leadership roles during the development, but also enable them in the future to take on more leadership roles as we go ahead with this committee. So there's a snapshot on the slide. You can see which countries are involved with their flags. Next slide, please. So what's next? As I mentioned, the documents will be published in May. The committee is at the moment looking at promoting these published standards, which is really important, obviously, and I will talk about that a little bit in my actions you can take to make sure it is known that these standards exist. So they're working on brochures, they are identifying events where we can talk about the ISO standards that are being developed by this committee. And also they have a communication task force. They have a LinkedIn page. They're trying really to increase the visibilities on those documents. Next slide, please. So what is coming next for the committee in general? The committee is looking forward in terms of a strategic placement. They are aware that this is the first suite of standards in this space. They are aware that this is probably not perfect. 100 countries discussing and coming to an agreement, as you can imagine, is not easy. So there might be some shortfalls in the document. However, the committee is already planning to improve the document as soon as possible. So it's not going to take years, ideally, to improve the document. The committee will be launching an international survey to gather information around the shortcomings, the gaps, what needs to be improved, what has been missing, to ensure the document will be updated quickly and the industry can apply it. We also would like to integrate some more requirements and better consider small businesses which are currently not considered in detail. So you have a bit of a snapshot on the bottom as a timeline when we are applying, when we are hopeful to apply this. So beginning 2025, the survey will start, and hopefully by mid of 2025, we have the results and then can launch a revision by the end of 2025. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a reminder, the difference between standards and regulation. I don't think I have to explain this very much to you. Standards, obviously, because standards can be the basis for regulation, how standards are made matter, just as much as how a regulation is crafted. Next slide, please. ISO adheres to the WTO TBT agreement and applies transparency, coherency, and effectiveness and openness as well. And additionally to the WTO principles, we also emphasize on due process, national implementation, adoption of ISO standards, which can be adopted on a national level, but also can be modified on a national level as well. If there is a circumstance where the international standard is not sufficient and additional requirements, guidance need to be applied because of the unique circumstances of a country. And obviously, stakeholder engagement is very important to us as well. Next slide, please. So what can you do? So I'm just keeping it quite short to those 4 items. Visibility is really important. Standards can only support regulation if key players like policymakers are aware of their existence. If they're not aware, they're not going to be cited. They're not going to be cited in regulation or in contracts either. Harmonization, the use of international standards can remove unnecessary barriers to trade, increased interoperability. If we don't speak a common language, we don't understand each other, and we don't have a level playing field either, which is really important. That's why it was really important to the committee to involve developing countries from the get-go to ensure they are able to actually apply these standards in their own countries as well. Obviously, coordination between the international trade community, policymakers, and the national standardization bodies is central. As mentioned before, ISO has 170 members, 1 peak member body in each country. Our standards, as I said, can be adopted and modified if they need be, and the contact details for each of the countries are available on our website. An open dialogue with the NSB is really important, and many of our members would like to have a more open dialogue with policymakers. They find it very difficult quite often to find the right person to talk to on that level. And also identifying gaps. At the DPP last week, I already mentioned that we are very open to hold a workshop, a form of a workshop where we can all talk together about the gaps and where you need our support. Without that identification, we are sometimes blind because, as you know, silos do exist, and we sometimes don't always talk to each other, and they're not very clear with each other. To break that barrier down, we really would like to have a more open dialogue with policymakers or your membership. This will lead then to more projects and ideally close these loops and gaps. As I mentioned, the TC is planning the revisions of the standards in the near future, so it's actually timely as well. So if you happy, we could send you the survey as well if you're interested, and then if you can provide us some feedback, that would be very well appreciated. Next slide, please. So that's it from us, from me. On the left-hand side, you find information of the committee leadership. Melissa is the committee manager of the committee, and Catherine is the chair of the committee. If you have specific questions around the work, obviously, if you're I think most countries I see in the room are already on the committee. If you shouldn't be, please get in touch with your national standardization body.